At my daughter's wedding, she raised her glass and smiled as she made a toast to a real father and pointed to my father-in-law as if I, her biological father, had never existed. I was furious, my heart boiling with betrayal, but instead of causing a scene, I also raised my glass and said my toast. After my words, the guests burst into applause, and the bride and groom left the wedding in a panic. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you are listening in the comments. The door slammed against the wall with a crack that made me jump. Lee burst through without knocking, her diamond ring catching the afternoon light like a weapon as she waved her hand in my face. "Dad, I'm getting married." Her designer purse hit my wooden kitchen table with a thud, scattering the bills I'd been sorting. The wedding is May 15th, and I need at least $20,000. I blinked, still holding yesterday's electric bill. My daughter stood there in clothes that probably cost more than my monthly budget, her engagement ring flashing deliberately as she gestured. The stone had to be 3 carats, maybe 4. 20,000? I set down the bill carefully. "Honey, that's wonderful about the engagement, but Benjamin's family expects a proper wedding." She paced around my modest kitchen like a caged animal. "The Gordons own half the commercial district downtown. They're not going to accept some backyard barbecue reception." I stood slowly, my joints protesting. The kidney surgery last year had left me weaker than I'd admit to anyone, especially Lee. "Let me check what I have saved." My hands trembled slightly as I reached for the bank book tucked behind the sugar canister. The pages felt thin between my fingers as I opened to the last entry, $5,247. 3 years of careful saving. Every penny counted twice. "Here," I held it out to her. "I've got 5,000 saved. It's not 20, but maybe we could plan something beautiful within—" Lee snatched the bank book from my hands, her manicured nails sharp against the worn cover. She flipped through the pages with growing disgust. 5,000? The booklet flew from her fingers, pages fluttering as it hit the linoleum floor. "I'll be embarrassed in front of the Gordons. They'll think I have a loser for a father." The word hit like a physical blow. I stared at my daughter, wondering when the sweet girl who used to climb into my lap had become this demanding stranger. Her expensive perfume filled my small kitchen, overwhelming the familiar scent of coffee and old wood. "Honey, I know it's not what you hoped, but all the money went to your mother's treatments. The medical bills—" "Oh, please." Lee's laugh was cold as winter wind. "Stop making excuses and start thinking about solutions. Benjamin's father owns 3 appliance stores. His mother drives a BMW. What am I supposed to tell them about my family?" Through the window, I could see her luxury sedan parked next to my 20-year-old pickup truck. The contrast said everything about how far apart our worlds had grown. Lee checked her diamond-studded watch with theatrical impatience. "I don't have time for this poverty routine, Dad. Figure something out, or I'll have to ask Benjamin's family to cover everything themselves." She gathered her purse, every movement calculated for maximum impact. The afternoon sun slanted through my faded curtains, highlighting the gulf between her polished perfection and my worn surroundings. "You know what the worst part is?" Lee paused at the doorway, her voice dropping to something more dangerous than anger. "I thought maybe, just once, you could actually help me instead of disappointing me." My throat tightened. "I'm trying to help. Maybe if we looked at a smaller venue, or—" "Smaller?" Her eyes flashed. Benjamin's sister had her reception at the Springfield Country Club. 300 guests, live orchestra, imported flowers. That's the standard I'm competing with. She stepped closer, and I could smell the expensive moisturizer she used, see my own reflection in her designer sunglasses. "I'm 35 years old, Dad. This is my chance at real security, real happiness. Don't you want that for me?" The question hung between us like smoke. Of course I wanted her happiness. I'd given everything for it, my savings, my health, my wife's final years spent worrying about money instead of making memories. Lee smoothed her silk blouse and lifted her chin. "Benjamin's family has real money, Dad. His father's business is worth millions. His mother collects art." She paused, letting that sink in. "They're going to be my family now, my real family." The words struck deeper than any slap could have. I gripped the back of my kitchen chair, feeling suddenly dizzy. "What does that mean exactly?" My voice came out hoarser than intended. Lee's smile was sharp as broken glass. She was building to something worse, I could feel it in the way she held herself, like a cat preparing to pounce. It means I'm going to have a father who can actually provide for his family. Lee's words cut through the kitchen air like razor wire. Victor Gordon owns a business empire, Dad. He builds things, creates jobs, makes a difference in this community. I sank into the chair, the wooden seat creaking under my weight. I worked 40 years as a mechanic. I provided for this family. Provided what? This? She gestured around my modest kitchen with disgust. Peeling wallpaper and secondhand furniture? Mom deserved better than this. My chest tightened. I pulled open the kitchen drawer where I kept the important papers, my fingers finding the thick folder of medical bills. The paper felt heavy in my hands as I set it on the table between us. These are from your mother's treatments. Chemotherapy, radiation, experimental drugs the insurance wouldn't cover. I opened the folder carefully, like handling something sacred. $83,000, Lee. That's where the money went. She flipped through the papers without reading them, her movements sharp and dismissive. Bills from Springfield Memorial Hospital, receipts from pharmacies, payment plans I'd signed with shaking hands while my wife lay dying 3 floors above us. Mom died a year ago. Lee threw the papers back at me, several floating to the floor. Time to stop feeling sorry for yourself and start earning. Benjamin's father didn't build his business by making excuses. The cruelty in her voice made something inside me break. I bent to collect the scattered bills, my knees protesting as I gathered the documentation of my wife's final battle. She fought for 3 years, sweetheart. Every treatment, every specialist visit, every experimental drug that might give us more time together. I straightened slowly, holding the papers against my chest. I'd spend it all again to have one more day with her. Lee checked her watch again, already mentally somewhere else. That's your choice, Dad. But I'm not going to sacrifice my future for your past. She walked to the window, staring out at her car like it represented escape from everything disappointing about her origins. The late afternoon light made her hair shine, reminded me painfully of her mother at that age. The Gordon family summers in Wisconsin. They have a lake house with 12 bedrooms. Benjamin's told me all about their Christmas parties. They hire professional decorators, cater for 200 people. She turned back to me with eyes that had gone cold. That's the life I'm choosing, Dad. That's the family I want to be part of. I stayed silent, understanding finally dawning. This wasn't about wedding expenses or social status. This was about replacing everything she'd grown up with, including me. Lee collected her purse, checking her reflection in her phone screen. Her makeup was perfect, not a hair out of place despite the emotional tornado she'd just unleashed. I told Benjamin about you, of course, about Mom's illness, about your financial situation. She paused at the door, her hand on the knob. He felt sorry for me, said he understood why I needed to build a new life with people who could actually support me. The kitchen felt smaller suddenly, the walls pressing in around us. I gripped the folder of medical bills tighter, these concrete reminders of love and sacrifice that meant nothing to the woman my daughter had become. Don't worry, Dad. Lee's smile was bright as a knife blade. I'll have a real father now, one who can actually provide for his family. Victor Gordon knows how to take care of the people he loves. The door closed behind her with a soft click that somehow hurt worse than her earlier slam. I heard her heels clicking down the front steps, the expensive car starting with a purr my old truck could never match. I sat alone in my kitchen as the afternoon light faded, surrounded by the scattered evidence of everything I'd given and everything she'd decided it wasn't worth. 3.5 hours passed before I could move. The kitchen had grown dark around me, shadows creeping across the floor like memories I couldn't shake. When I finally stood, my legs had gone stiff from sitting motionless, processing the devastation Lee had left behind. I splashed cold water on my face in the bathroom, staring at the reflection of a man who looked older than his 65 years. The medical bills were still scattered on the kitchen table where Lee had thrown them, but I left them there. I had something more important to examine. In my study, I pulled down the photo albums from the shelf above my desk. The leather covers felt familiar under my fingers as I searched for what I knew was there. Lee's wedding photos from her first marriage. There she was at 28, radiant in white lace, standing next to Alan Hunt. He'd been a good man, an accountant with steady work and kind eyes. I remembered liking him immediately, the way he'd helped my wife with her coat, how he'd insisted on taking us all to dinner after the engagement announcement. The marriage lasted 2 years. I found the newspaper clipping tucked behind the wedding photos, a brief mention of their divorce in the Springfield Herald's legal notices. Irreconcilable differences, it had said. But I remembered the real story, the conversations with Alan's sister at the grocery store, the whispered details of how Lee had systematically drained their joint accounts before filing papers. Men are stupid to trust women with their money, Lee had told me after the divorce was final, sitting in this same kitchen with her settlement check. Alan never saw it coming until it was too late. I'd thought it was bitterness talking then, the angry words of someone whose marriage had failed. Now I understood it was a mission statement. My hands found the small notebook I kept in the desk drawer, the one where I tracked household expenses and medical appointments. I turned to a fresh page and wrote Benjamin Gordon at the top. What did he really know about my daughter? Had she told him about Alan, about the pattern that was already emerging before she turned 30? Or was he another kind man with trusting eyes, walking into a trap designed to look like love? I pulled out the Springfield business directory and found Gordon Appliances listed with 3 locations. Benjamin Gordon, assistant manager, worked at the downtown store. His father, Victor, was listed as owner and president. The evening light filtered through my study windows, casting long shadows across the family photos arranged on my desk. My wife smiled at me from our wedding picture, her eyes full of the hope and trust that had sustained our marriage for 38 years. Lee had inherited her mother's smile, but not her heart. I picked up the phone and stared at the number for Gordon Appliances. Tomorrow was Thursday. They'd be open until 9. I could drive downtown, walk into the store, meet the man who thought he was marrying my daughter. What would I tell him? That Lee was hunting again and his family didn't see it coming? That she'd already practiced this routine once, perfecting her technique on a man who'd loved her enough to trust her with everything? The notebook felt heavy in my hands as I wrote down Benjamin's work schedule, gleaned from the store's website. Monday through Friday, 9 to 6. Saturday mornings for inventory. I closed the photo album and returned it to its shelf, but I kept the newspaper clipping on my desk where I could see it. Evidence of what my daughter was capable of, and proof that she'd done it before. The phone rang suddenly, making me jump. I let it ring 4 times before checking the caller ID, a number I didn't recognize. But I knew it was time to start recognizing things. Time to stop being the disappointed father who'd failed to provide enough, and start being the man who might prevent another good family from learning the hard way what Lee Warren was really worth. I picked up my pen and began writing down everything I knew about the Gordon family and everything they needed to know about mine. 5 days of research had led me here. I'd spent those nights after Lee's brutal visit learning everything I could about the Gordon family through old newspaper archives and business directories. Victor Gordon's name appeared on half the commercial property deeds in Springfield. His agricultural equipment business employed 60 people across 3 locations. Now, I sat in my pickup truck across from their main office building, studying the enemy camp. The Gordon Agricultural Equipment headquarters rose 4 stories above the smaller shops surrounding it, all glass and modern brick, where my own neighborhood still showed wood siding from the 1960s. Expensive vehicles filled the executive parking spaces. A black Mercedes that probably cost more than I'd earned in 2 years. A silver BMW that gleamed under the morning sun. Even the company trucks looked newer than anything I'd ever owned. I needed information that wasn't in public records, real intelligence about these people who thought they were getting a wonderful daughter-in-law. The Main Street Cafe sat directly across from the Gordon building, perfect for observation. Inside, the morning crowd buzzed with the comfortable chatter of a small town where everyone knew everyone else's business. "Coffee black," I told the young woman behind the counter, noting the way she glanced at my worn flannel shirt before naming the price. "You're not from around here, are you?" She handed me the steaming cup with practiced efficiency. "Springfield born and raised, just don't get downtown much anymore." I gestured toward the Gordon building through the window. "Impressive operation they've built over there." "Oh, Gordon Agricultural?" Her face lit up with the enthusiasm of someone sharing favorite gossip. "They're the biggest employer here after the hospital. Victor Gordon basically owns this whole block." I sipped my coffee, encouraging her to continue. "Sounds like a successful man. Successful and smart. My boyfriend works there in the parts department. Says Mr. Gordon knows every aspect of the business, treats his employees fair, but expects results." She leaned closer, lowering her voice. His son Benjamin is completely different, though. Quiet, kind of nervous, nothing like his father. Perfect. I left the cafe with more information than I'd hoped for and headed to the hardware store next door, where an older man was arranging display items near the entrance. Morning, I nodded, picking up a package of screws I didn't need. Heard there's going to be a big society wedding coming up. The Gordon boy. The store owner's weathered face creased into a knowing smile. Benjamin? About time. Boy's 32 years old, been living at home his whole life. His parents been pushing him to find a wife for years. Lucky young woman marrying into that family. Richest family in 3 counties, that's for certain. Victor Gordon owns half the commercial real estate downtown, plus the farm equipment dealerships. He rang up my screws with hands that shook slightly. Course, money don't always buy happiness. Benjamin always seemed like he needed someone to make decisions for him. I paid for the screws and returned to my truck, processing what I'd learned. Benjamin was weak, indecisive, dominated by his parents. Exactly the kind of man Lee had learned to identify and exploit. From my pickup, I dialed the number I'd found in the business directory. The phone rang 3 times before an uncertain male voice answered. Gordon Agricultural Equipment, this is Benjamin. Benjamin, this is Everett Warren, Lee's father. Silence stretched across the connection. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a nervousness that confirmed everything the hardware store owner had suggested. Oh, Mr. Warren, yes, of course. Is everything all right with Lee? The hesitation in his voice told me volumes. A confident man wouldn't question his fiance's father calling. A man secure in his relationship wouldn't sound worried about what news the call might bring. Everything's fine, son. I was wondering if you might have time for dinner sometime this week. I'd like to get to know you better before the wedding. Dinner? Another pause. Yes, I suppose that would be appropriate. When did you have in mind? How about tomorrow evening, Miller's Steakhouse, around 7? Yes, that should be fine. Should Lee come too? The question revealed everything. He was afraid to meet me alone, needed his fiancée present for protection. A 32-year-old man who couldn't handle dinner with his future father-in-law without backup. Just us men, I said firmly. I think it's time we had a proper conversation. After hanging up, I started my truck and pulled away from the Gordon building. In my rearview mirror, I could see employees moving purposefully between the glass doors, building their family's empire while remaining completely unaware that a predator was circling their youngest member. Tomorrow night, I would begin the real investigation. Miller's Steakhouse occupied the corner of Main and 3rd Streets, the kind of establishment where Springfield's successful families celebrated anniversaries and business deals. I arrived 30 minutes early, requesting a corner table where our conversation wouldn't carry to nearby diners. The prices on the menu reflected the restaurant's reputation. $28 for a ribeye steak, $15 for grilled chicken. I ordered water and waited, studying the other patrons in their business suits and cocktail dresses, feeling conspicuous in my best shirt that still showed its age around the collar. Benjamin arrived exactly at 7, wearing a charcoal suit that probably cost more than my monthly budget. His handshake was soft, uncertain. Like everything else about him, I was beginning to understand. "Thank you for meeting me," I said as he settled into the chair across from me, immediately fidgeting with the cloth napkin. "Of course, Mr. Warren. I've been looking forward to meeting Lee's family properly." His eyes darted around the restaurant, avoiding direct contact with mine. "Should we order wine? I can recommend something from their selection." "Water's fine for me, son. Maybe you should focus on eating instead of drinking tonight." He flushed slightly, ordering an expensive salmon dish while I chose the least costly item available. As we waited for our food, I watched him twist his engagement ring around his finger, a nervous habit that suggested deeper anxieties. "Tell me about yourself, Benjamin. How did you meet my daughter?" "At the bank where she works. I was setting up business accounts for some of our expansion plans." He relaxed slightly, discussing safer territory. Lee was so professional, so knowledgeable about financial planning. She helped us structure everything perfectly. Of course she had. Lee understood money better than most accountants, particularly how to access and control it. "And you fell in love immediately?" The question hung between us like smoke. Benjamin's fork paused halfway to his mouth, his carefully composed expression flickering. She's a remarkable woman, beautiful, intelligent, ambitious. Each word sounded rehearsed, like he'd practiced this speech. My parents are very impressed with her. That's not what I asked. I leaned forward, using the authority of age and experience to push past his polite deflections. Do you love her, Benjamin? His face went pale. The fork trembled slightly in his grip before he set it down, abandoning any pretense of eating his $40 salmon. Of course I love her. Why would you ask such a thing? Because you sound like you're trying to convince yourself more than me. The silence stretched uncomfortably. Around us, other diners continued their pleasant conversations, celebrating business successes and family milestones, while our table felt isolated in its growing tension. Love is complicated, Mr. Warren. Benjamin's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. Lee says we can't wait, that we need to get married quickly before I change my mind. There it was. The admission I'd been probing for, delivered with the resignation of a man who'd already lost control of his own life. Before you change your mind about what? About taking care of her properly, about being the kind of husband she deserves. He looked up at me with eyes that held a desperate plea for understanding. She says I need to prove myself, that successful men don't hesitate when they find the right woman. I recognized Lee's manipulation techniques, the same psychological pressure she'd applied during our confrontation 5 days ago. She'd found Benjamin's weakness, his need for approval, his fear of disappointing others, and was exploiting it ruthlessly. What do you think, Benjamin? Not what Lee thinks, not what your parents think. What do you want? His hands shook as he reached for his water glass. I want to make everyone happy. I want to be worthy of the family name, worthy of someone like Lee. The conversation continued for another 20 minutes, but I'd learned everything I needed. Benjamin wasn't in love with my daughter. He was trapped by her, pressured into a marriage that terrified him, but which he lacked the strength to escape. When we parted in the parking lot, his handshake was even weaker than before. I watched him drive away in his expensive car, a prisoner in a luxury vehicle, heading home to plan a wedding that would destroy his life. But first, I needed absolute confirmation of what I already suspected about Lee's true motivations. 3 days later, I was preparing a simple dinner of canned soup and crackers when my phone rang. Lee's name appeared on the caller ID, and for a moment I considered letting it go to voicemail. But I needed to hear her voice, needed to understand exactly what kind of person my daughter had become. Hello, sweetheart. Dad. Her voice sparkled with the kind of excitement I hadn't heard since she was a child opening Christmas presents. You'll never guess what Victor bought me today. I set down my soup spoon, reaching for the small notebook where I'd been recording details about the Gordon family. What's that, honey? A $3,000 wedding dress. And Alice, that's Benjamin's mother, she's giving me her diamond bracelet and matching earrings. Real diamonds, Dad, not the fake stuff I've been wearing all my life. $3,000, more than half my entire savings, spent on a single garment she'd wear once. That's very generous of them. I kept my voice carefully neutral, writing down the figures in my notebook. What did Benjamin say about all these expensive gifts? He said, whatever makes me happy makes him happy too. Lee's laugh tinkled like wind chimes. Finally, a real man who knows how to treat a woman properly. The casual cruelty of that comment, the implicit criticism of how I'd treated her mother and her, hit like a physical blow. I gripped the pen tighter, forcing myself to continue the conversation. Sounds like you're getting everything you wanted. Oh, Dad, it's even better than I dreamed. Victor owns property all over the county. 3 rental houses, 2 commercial buildings, plus the business. And Alice's family money goes back 4 generations. Old Springfield society, you know? She continued describing the Gordon family wealth with the detailed enthusiasm of an appraiser cataloging valuable items. Vacation homes, investment accounts, antique collections, everything calculated for maximum financial impact. Nothing about love or companionship or building a life together. What about Benjamin? I interrupted during her inventory of assets. Are you happy with him as a person? Benjamin? She paused as if the question confused her. He's perfect, Dad. Completely manageable. He does whatever I suggest without arguing, just like a husband should. Manageable? The word crystallized everything I'd suspected about her true feelings. Benjamin wasn't a partner or a love interest. He was a resource to be managed and exploited. Lee, do you remember your first marriage? With Alan? What about Alan? Her tone sharpened with irritation. That was completely different. Alan was too controlling, always questioning my decisions about money. As I recall, he questioned your decisions about spending his money. It was community property, Dad. Legally mine as much as his. Her voice turned cold. Besides, that's ancient history. I learned from my mistakes with Alan. This time, I'm making sure I find a man who appreciates what I bring to the relationship. After she hung up, I sat at my kitchen table as the evening light faded outside my window. My notebook lay open beside me, filled with details about diamond bracelets and rental properties and vacation homes. Not a single notation about Benjamin's personality, his dreams, his hopes for their marriage together. My daughter had become a hunter, and the Gordon family was her prey. Benjamin's hesitant voice from our restaurant conversation echoed in my memory. His fear about changing his mind, his desperate need for approval, his complete inability to recognize the trap closing around him. I closed the notebook and moved to my window seat, watching the last light disappear behind the neighbor's roof. Tomorrow, I would begin the real work of protecting an innocent family from the predator I had raised. The sunset reminded me that some things, once lost, could never be recovered, but perhaps I could still prevent another family from learning that lesson the hard way. 15 days had passed since Lee's call about the Gordon family gifts. Those days crawled by with the weight of impending confrontation, each one bringing me closer to a decision I'd never imagined making about my own daughter. May 10th found me standing in Springfield menswear, staring at price tags that made my monthly food budget look generous. The cheapest suit on the rack cost $300, money I didn't have for clothes I'd wear exactly once. "Can I help you find something?" The salesman approached with the practiced smile of someone accustomed to disappointed customers. "Need a wedding suit, nothing fancy." I moved toward the clearance section, hoping desperation didn't show in my voice. He followed me to the back corner, where markdown tags promised better prices. Special occasion? My daughter's wedding. The words felt strange in my mouth, formal and distant. Want to look presentable. A navy suit hung forgotten on the clearance rack, marked down twice to $200. Still expensive, but possible if I skipped groceries for a week. The fabric felt thin under my fingers, nothing like the quality clothes I'd seen Benjamin wearing. In the fitting room, my hands shook trying to manage the buttons. The kidney donation surgery had left me with tremors I tried to hide from everyone, but simple tasks revealed my limitations. The suit hung loose in some places, tight in others, clearly designed for someone younger and healthier. "This suit with the discount comes to $200, the salesman announced when I emerged. "It's a good value." $200, nearly half my monthly food budget for a single outfit. But I counted out the exact cash without complaint. The salesman's eyes softened with what looked like pity, and I hated how transparent my financial situation had become. Driving home, I hung the suit carefully in my old pickup truck, comparing it mentally to the luxury vehicles I imagined would fill the wedding parking lot. My daughter was marrying into money I couldn't comprehend, and everyone would know it the moment they saw me. May 12th brought the formal wedding invitation, delivered in an envelope so thick I could feel the expense before opening it. Mr. Everett Warren appeared in elegant script across heavy cardstock that probably cost more than my electric bill. Inside, gold embossed letters announced the ceremony at Riverfront Hall, Springfield's most exclusive venue. I'd driven past it countless times, but never imagined setting foot inside. The kind of place that charged $500 just for table rental, where dinner plates cost more than most people's weekly grocery budget. Nowhere in the elegant wording did I see mention of a rehearsal dinner invitation. Lee had excluded me from the pre-wedding gathering, too embarrassed by her poor father to include him in the intimate family celebrations. The Gordons would meet their new relatives without the inconvenient presence of someone who might remind them of Lee's modest origins. May 13th evening found me standing before my bathroom mirror, practicing words I'd never thought I'd need to speak. My reflection showed a tired man whose best shirt still looked shabby, whose hands trembled with more than nervousness. "Ladies and gentlemen," I began, my voice sounding thin in the small space. "I have something to share about my daughter." The words came easier with repetition, but the emotions behind them remained jagged and raw. 20 years of keeping a secret that had shaped everything about our family's financial struggles. 20 years of watching Lee benefit from a sacrifice she'd never known about. I pulled out the manila folder containing my medical records from the kidney donation. The paperwork was comprehensive. Hospital bills, insurance claims, surgical reports that documented everything I'd given up to save my wife's life. Evidence of love that Lee had dismissed as weakness. Of financial ruin she'd blamed on poor planning rather than desperate medical necessity. May the 14th afternoon, I sat at my kitchen table organizing the documents I'd need tomorrow. The medical files lay spread across the worn wood, next to Lee's expensive wedding invitation, with its gold lettering and silk ribbon. The contrast said everything about the distance that had grown between us, her world of luxury and mine of careful penny counting, separated by choices she'd never bothered to understand, and sacrifices she'd never bothered to appreciate. Tomorrow, at her perfect wedding in front of her new family's friends, I would tell the truth about what loving someone really cost, about what I'd given up so she could have a chance at life, and what she'd chosen to do with that chance. I folded the medical records carefully and placed them in my suit jacket pocket, next to the small wrapped gift I'd bought her, a simple picture frame that had consumed another week's grocery money. Tomorrow would change everything between us, but some truths were worth the price of losing a daughter who'd already chosen another father anyway. Wedding day arrived gray and humid, typical May weather in Illinois. I woke before dawn, unable to sleep past 4 a.m., and spent the morning hours pressing my discount suit and polishing shoes that showed their age despite my efforts. By 2:45 p.m., I sat in my pickup truck in the parking lot behind Riverfront Hall, watching luxury vehicles arrive in steady streams. Mercedes sedans, BMW coupes, Cadillac SUVs, each one worth more than I'd earned in several years. My rusted truck looked pathetic among them, but I'd parked in the back row where it might go unnoticed. The venue rose before me, like a monument to wealth I'd never achieve. Riverfront Hall commanded the best view in Springfield, its glass walls reflecting the Illinois River while offering guests climate-controlled elegance inside. Professional florists were still arranging white roses along the entrance, each bloom probably costing what I spent on groceries for a week. I carried my small gift through the elegant lobby, feeling underdressed despite my new suit. Other guests moved with the confident ease of people accustomed to such settings, their jewelry catching the light, their conversations peppered with references to vacations and investments I couldn't imagine affording. Bride or groom? An usher approached, immaculate in his rented tuxedo. Bride, I'm her father. His expression shifted slightly, surprise, perhaps pity, before recovering professional composure. Right this way, sir. He led me not to the front row where fathers traditionally sat, but to the back section reserved for distant relatives and acquaintances. I found myself wedged between an elderly woman who smelled of expensive perfume and a middle-aged couple who whispered about stock portfolios while we waited for the ceremony to begin. "Who's that man in the cheap suit?" The woman's voice carried despite her attempt at discretion. Her companion glanced back at me with barely concealed curiosity. "Must be the bride's father. Poor guy looks completely out of place." The front rows filled with Gordon family members, their designer clothes and confident postures marking them as Springfield's social elite. Victor Gordon commanded attention even while seated, his presence radiating the authority of someone accustomed to controlling every situation. Professional photographers moved through the crowd with expensive equipment, capturing every angle of the elegant ceremony setup. Their cameras focused exclusively on the Gordon side of the venue, documenting the wealth and status that would define this union. I noticed they'd positioned themselves to avoid including the cheaper seats where I sat. At exactly 3 p.m., the processional music began. Lee appeared at the back of the hall in her $3,000 dress, radiant and confident, every inch the sophisticated bride she'd always dreamed of becoming. Alice Gordon's diamond jewelry caught the light as she moved, transforming my daughter into someone I barely recognized. The ceremony proceeded with elegant precision until the officiant reached the traditional moment. "Who gives this woman in marriage?" Silence stretched across the hall. Lee stood frozen at the altar, her bouquet trembling slightly in her hands. I half rose from my seat, ready to speak the words that were mine by right. But Victor Gordon stepped forward from the front row, his voice carrying clearly through the sound system. "Her family and I do." The words hit me like a physical blow. Lee's face brightened with relief and gratitude as she looked at Victor, not once glancing toward the back where her real father sat stunned and forgotten. Applause rippled through the crowd at this touching display of acceptance and love. Around me, guests murmured approval at Victor's generous gesture, the wealthy patriarch claiming another family member through sheer force of personality and financial power. I sank back into my seat as the ceremony continued, watching my daughter pledge her future to a man she barely knew while accepting a substitute father who could provide what I never could. The vows sounded hollow from my distant position, promises made between strangers while real history sat ignored in the cheap seats. When the officiant pronounced them husband and wife, the photographers captured every moment of joy and celebration, except the image of a forgotten father sitting alone in the back row, watching his daughter choose money over memory, status over sacrifice. The receiving line formed without me. Guests congratulated the happy couple while I remained seated, understanding finally that my invitation had been a formality. I was expected to witness, not participate, in this celebration of everything I couldn't provide. As the crowd moved toward the reception hall, I followed at a distance, carrying my modest gift and the weight of complete exclusion from the most important day in my daughter's life. The reception hall sparkled with crystal chandeliers and silver table settings that reflected my modest appearance with cruel accuracy. I found myself seated at table 12, near the kitchen doors, surrounded by distant relatives and business associates who'd earned similar exile from the centers of power. My dinner companions were polite but disinterested, their attention focused on the head table, where Lee sat between Benjamin and Victor Gordon, like a princess flanked by her protectors. Her $3,000 dress caught the light with every movement, while Alice's diamonds made her sparkle like something crafted rather than born. The meal cost more per plate than I spent on food in a month. Servers in crisp uniforms presented courses I couldn't identify, wine that probably exceeded my monthly budget, desserts arranged like artwork. I picked at the elaborate portions while watching the head table's animated conversation, trying to read Lee's expressions from across the crowded room. Victor rose first when the toasts began, commanding attention with the natural authority of someone accustomed to being heard. His speech praised Lee's intelligence, her beauty, her perfect fit within the Gordon family structure. The crowd applauded his generous words about gaining a daughter who understood their values. Alice followed with tears in her eyes, speaking about welcoming Lee into their family circle, about the joy of finally having the daughter she'd always wanted. More applause, more murmurs of approval from guests who saw only the fairy tale surface of this marriage. Then Lee stood, champagne flute raised, every eye in the room focused on her radiant figure. The professional photographer positioned himself to capture what everyone expected would be the evening's most touching moment. "I want to raise a toast," Lee began, her voice carrying clearly through the sound system, "to someone very special tonight." My heart lifted slightly. Perhaps she would acknowledge me after all, find some way to include her real father in this celebration of her new life. "I want to toast the man who gave me a chance at a new beginning, who showed me what real family support looks like." She turned toward the head table with genuine warmth in her voice. "To my real father, Victor Gordon." The words struck like lightning. She raised her champagne glass directly toward Victor, her gesture unmistakable in its meaning. The crowd erupted in applause while Victor stood proudly, accepting the title she'd just bestowed upon him. "Thank you, daughter," Victor replied, his voice thick with emotion. "You're truly part of our family now, and we'll always take care of you the way you deserve." The applause continued as father and daughter embraced, the photographer capturing every angle of this touching moment. Around me, guests wiped away tears at the beautiful display of adoption and acceptance, of a young woman finding her true place in the world. I sat frozen in my corner seat, napkin clenched in my fist, watching my daughter publicly reject everything I'd sacrificed for her survival. The champagne flute sparkled, the chandeliers glittered, and 300 guests celebrated Lee's declaration that her real father was the man who could provide luxury, not love. She'd chosen wealth over history, status over sacrifice, and done it in front of everyone who mattered in Springfield society. The man who'd given her life, who donated his kidney to save her mother, who'd impoverished himself for her future, that man sat forgotten at table 12 while she crowned her replacement. But I had information she didn't expect me to use, evidence of sacrifices she'd never bothered to learn about, proof of what real family support had actually cost when it came from someone who loved her instead of someone who could afford her. The crowd was still applauding Lee's touching tribute when I slowly pushed back my chair and stood. The action felt deliberate, final, like crossing a bridge I could never return across. 300 pairs of eyes began turning toward the back corner, where an old man in an ill-fitting suit was rising to speak. The applause for Lee's toast still echoed through the banquet hall when I pushed back my chair. The scraping sound cut through the celebration like a blade, and heads began turning toward my corner table near the kitchen doors. I stood slowly, my body protesting after hours in the uncomfortable chair. But my resolve had never been stronger. 20 years of keeping this secret, 20 years of watching Lee benefit from a sacrifice she'd never known about. Tonight, that silence ended. "I want to raise this glass to something real," I said, lifting my water tumbler. My voice carried clearly through the now quieting room. "To genuine love that isn't measured by bank accounts." Conversations died in waves across the elegant banquet hall. Crystal champagne flutes froze halfway to lips as 300 guests turned to focus on the old man in the ill-fitting suit, standing alone in the back corner. Lee remained at the head table, her champagne glass still raised toward Victor, confusion replacing triumph on her perfectly made-up face. Benjamin sat beside her, his discomfort growing more visible by the second. "When Lee was 5 years old," I continued, my hand unconsciously moving to my left side where the surgical scar remained hidden beneath my discount shirt. "She needed a kidney transplant to survive." The silence became absolute. Not a fork clinked, not a chair squeaked. Even the waitstaff stopped moving, sensing the weight of what was being revealed. I didn't hesitate for 1 second. My voice grew stronger despite my physical weakness, fueled by 2 decades of suppressed truth. I became her donor. I gave her a piece of myself so she could live. Lee's face drained of color. The champagne glass trembled in her hand, diamond bracelet catching the chandelier light as her arm wavered. Around the room, guests leaned forward, understanding beginning to dawn on their faces. The surgery was successful, but the recovery costs nearly bankrupted us. Every penny we'd saved, every dollar we could borrow, it all went to keeping my daughter healthy. I looked directly at Lee, seeing recognition and horror growing in her eyes. I never asked for thanks because that's what real love does. It sacrifices without keeping score. Victor Gordon's confident posture deflated. Alice gripped her pearl necklace, tears gathering in her eyes as the magnitude of what she was hearing sank in. Benjamin dropped his head, finally understanding the manipulation he'd fallen victim to. But today, I want her to remember something important. I raised my water glass higher, addressing the room but speaking to my daughter. Real love isn't diamonds or expensive dresses or country club memberships. Real love is giving up a piece of yourself, literally, so someone else can survive. My voice cracked slightly on the final words, but I pushed through. A real father doesn't buy affection with jewelry and vacation homes. A real father donates his organs, empties his bank account, and sacrifices his health so his child can have a future. The silence stretched for what felt like hours. Then, from somewhere in the middle of the room, someone began to clap. The applause started slowly, uncertainly, then built like thunder rolling across the elegant space. Guest after guest rose to their feet, applauding not the bride or her wealthy new family, but the forgotten man in the corner who had given everything for love. The sound became overwhelming, drowning out the wedding celebration, transforming Lee's moment of triumph into something entirely different. I stood there accepting the recognition I'd never sought, watching my daughter's face crumble as she realized everyone in the room now understood exactly what kind of person she had become. The applause continued, growing louder, while Lee and Benjamin looked at each other in growing panic, knowing there was only one choice left to them now. The thunderous applause filled Riverfront Hall like a storm, but instead of celebrating the bride, 300 guests were honoring her father. Lee stood frozen at the head table, her designer dress suddenly feeling like a costume under the weight of scrutinizing gazes. "We have to leave," she whispered desperately to Benjamin, grabbing his arm with manicured fingers that had never worked for anything. "Right now." Benjamin stared at her with new eyes, finally seeing past the carefully constructed facade. "Lee, what he said, is it true? Did your father really give you his kidney?" "It doesn't matter." Her voice carried an edge of panic that several nearby guests noticed. "Look at them. They're all staring at us." And they were. The applause continued, but conversations had begun at tables throughout the hall. Whispered words like ungrateful and shameful drifted across the expensive floral arrangements. The fairy tale wedding was transforming into a morality play, with Lee cast as the villain. Victor Gordon attempted damage control, standing from the head table with his hands raised for attention. "Ladies and gentlemen, if we could return to celebrating," but his words were lost in the continuing ovation for Everett. Guests ignored the wealthy patriarch. Their moral outrage focused entirely on the daughter who had publicly humiliated the father who'd saved her life. "Benjamin, please!" Lee tugged at his sleeve, desperation making her movements sharp and graceless. "We need to get out of here before this gets worse." Benjamin looked around the room, seeing the faces of people he'd known his entire life, regarding him with mixtures of pity and disgust. His new wife, the woman he'd been pressured into marrying, was revealed as someone who could dismiss the ultimate sacrifice as inconvenient history. "Where would we go?" he asked weakly, but he was already standing, understanding that staying would only deepen their humiliation. Together they moved toward the main exit, trying to appear casual while whispers followed their path. The expensive wedding dress that had cost $3,000 now felt like a burden, its train catching on chair legs as Lee hurried toward escape. "Benjamin, where are you going?" Victor called after them, his authoritative voice cracking with confusion. "This is your wedding. We need some air," Benjamin managed, but he couldn't meet his father's eyes. Alice Gordon had collapsed into her chair, overwhelmed by the emotional weight of Everett's revelation. The diamonds she'd proudly given to Lee seemed meaningless compared to the sacrifice the real father had made. Several guests moved to assist her, fanning her with wedding programs while she struggled to process what she'd witnessed. The bride and groom's exit became a spectacle in itself. Guests turned to watch them flee, some pointing, others shaking their heads at the dramatic conclusion to what should have been Springfield's social event of the year. "That poor man gave his kidney, and she treats him like that?" an elderly woman said, loudly enough for Lee to hear. "What kind of daughter humiliates her father on her wedding day?" Her companion replied with equal volume. The words followed Lee and Benjamin to the parking lot, where their expensive hired car waited with white ribbons and "just married" signs that now seemed like mockery. The driver looked confused as they approached, still an hour before the scheduled departure. "Drive!" Lee commanded as soon as the doors slammed shut. "Just drive!" The luxury sedan pulled away from Riverfront Hall while the party continued inside, except now the celebration honored a different hero entirely. Through the rear window, Lee could see guests gathered around her father's corner table, shaking his hand, patting his shoulder, giving him the recognition she'd tried to steal. Benjamin sat silently beside her as Springfield's lights blurred past the window, finally understanding that he'd married a woman who could measure a father's love in dollar amounts and find it lacking. The wedding was over, but the humiliation would last far longer than the expensive dress or the diamond jewelry could comfort. By 8 o'clock, I was home. The reception had continued for another hour after Lee and Benjamin's departure, with guests approaching my corner table to express their support and share their own stories of family sacrifice. I'd declined several offers of rides, preferring to drive my old pickup truck through Springfield's quiet streets while processing the evening's events. The house felt peaceful after the chaos of the wedding. I hung my $200 suit carefully in the closet next to my late wife's dresses, changing into the comfortable clothes that represented my real self rather than the man trying to fit into someone else's world. My reflection in the bathroom mirror showed exhaustion, but also something I hadn't seen in years, dignity restored. The lines around my eyes spoke of grief and struggle, but no longer of defeat. Tonight, I'd finally stood up for the values my wife and I had built our marriage on. The phone rang as I settled into Evelyn's reading chair, the worn leather molding around my tired body like an embrace. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize. "Mr. Warren, this is Margaret Phillips. I was at the wedding tonight." Her voice carried genuine emotion. "What you did was incredible, that kind of sacrifice. And for your daughter to treat you so dismissively. Thank you, Margaret. I appreciate that. My daughter saw the whole thing. She called me crying, saying she wants to hug her father when she gets home tonight." 3 more calls followed, each from wedding guests who wanted to express their support. Word of my revelation had spread beyond the reception hall, into Springfield's network of families and friends who understood the true meaning of sacrifice. "I had no idea what you went through for her," another caller said. "You're a hero, Mr. Warren." I accepted their praise graciously but briefly, understanding that the real victory wasn't in the applause or recognition. The victory was in finally speaking truth after 20 years of silence, in defending the memory of love that had once shaped every decision in our modest household. As the evening deepened, I turned off the phone and sat in the growing darkness, watching familiar shadows lengthen across furniture Evelyn and I had chosen together 40 years ago. The wedding invitation lay on the side table next to our wedding photo, two images representing completely different definitions of marriage and family. 20 years ago, I'd made the decision to keep the kidney donation secret, believing Lee was too young to carry the weight of knowing her father had sacrificed part of himself for her survival. Tonight, I had realized she was old enough to understand, but had chosen not to care. I'd given her life twice, once through surgery, once through the confrontation that might finally teach her the difference between price and value. Both gifts were complete now. Whatever she chose to do with them was beyond my control. The house settled around me with familiar creaks and sighs, sounds of a home built on authentic love rather than financial calculation. Tomorrow would bring whatever consequences my actions had set in motion. But tonight, I felt the kind of peace that comes from living according to your deepest values, regardless of the cost. Through the window, Springfield's lights twinkled like distant stars, each one representing a family navigating their own struggles between love and money, sacrifice and selfishness. Tonight, at least a few of those families had been reminded that real love doesn't keep receipts, doesn't demand recognition, and doesn't measure its worth in bank balances or social status. I'd finally honored the promise I'd made to Evelyn when we married, to protect our family's values no matter how difficult the world made it to live by them. The victory was quiet, but it was complete. If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left. Thank you for watching.